Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for coming to attend this morning's session, post-karaoke or NAID. We are here this morning to talk about the future of hyperlocal governance and empowering communities. I'm Zoe Billingham, I'm Director of IPPR North, and we're running this event in partnership with Local Trust, whom we are also doing some work on this topic with. So everything you're saying and reflecting on and comments will be used again and again, no doubt, in our work even beyond this session. I'm really delighted to welcome you all today, but before I welcome our panellists, just a bit of an intro to what we're going to cover this morning. I think as IPPR North, we've done a lot of work over the decades on devolution. And of course, devolution has become a bit of a hotly contested political topic, which we're very pleased about. And it's great to see political parties across the spectrum sort of vying for that political space. But of course, whilst devolution so far has very much focused on mayoral combined authorities and metro mayors and what they can do for communities, we think the question of what that means for local authorities, what that means for parish councils, town councils, more informal forums below that, neighbourhood planning, etc., is just as important. We can't just devolve power to one tier without thinking about then the interactions for those that work within and with communities. So we think we must empower communities at the hyperlocal level in order to make a success of devolution, to make sense of devolution, and that dynamic neighbourhood governance is the key to unlocking that. Of course, we know that between the kind of patchwork quilt that we have across the country of different forums, parish councils, town councils, we have different kind of setups in different areas. So there's a really interesting question about both kind of what kind of complete coverage looks like of the country. Should it be completely covered, or should we just be sort of tailoring hyperlocal governance to place, as well as the types of governance that are in each place, through from the kind of more formal structures, the town and parish councils, through to less formal get-togethers. So we're really fascinated in this question and really delighted to welcome such an esteemed panel. Just before we start, I wanted to say we are live streaming this session and recording it, just so you are aware. Without further ado, I'm going to just introduce the panel, and then each of them are going to speak for 5 minutes to set out their views on this agenda. We're then going to do about 10 minutes of panel discussion before I open it out to Q&A. So first we will hear from Baroness Pinnock, who I'm sure you all know, and is the Lord's spokesperson for Levelling Up Communities Local Government Party, followed by Councillor Tom Pickstone, who is the Chief Executive of the Association of Liberal Democrat Councillors, shortly after by Jonathan Owen, Chief Executive of the National Association of Local Councils, and last but by no means least, George Atzev, the committee member from the Arches Chatham Neighbourhood Forum. So we're going from the formal to the less formal, perhaps, or about your back to spin it. Okay, well, there we go, a challenge. The gauntlet has been laid already. But without further ado, Baroness Pinnock, over to you.
I hope you don't mind if I stand. I prefer standing. And then I can see everybody at the back, and you perhaps could see me. I hope that works for the mic.
Absolutely, we think,
yeah. So I love local government. Let's start with that. I've been a local councillor and still am for 30 plus years. So local government is what drives me. And Zoe said just now that we've had devolution in this country. Well, one of the things I want us to think about this morning is, have we? We've had delegation. We've had the creation of mayors of big metropolitan areas, or in some cases, smaller urban settlements. But have they got the powers? Have they really got devolved powers to make the decisions for those areas? No. So what they get is money from on high, from central government, to divvy up mostly according to what the government rules say. So I don't think we have devolution, and I desperately think we need devolution. So that would be my starting point. The next sort of challenge to you all is, I think local government is under threat. Under threat. Let me tell you why I think that is happening. The government is trying to force the end of district councils and merge them with counties into unitary authorities. So the last two that have been made, one in North Yorkshire and one in Somerset. So in Somerset, 5 district councils and the county were forced together to form one unitary authority. And in North Yorkshire, ditto. Now, somebody tell me how in North Yorkshire, which is from top to bottom 100 miles, and from east to west 100 miles, is local government. When it takes, if you represent, let's say, the southern part of North Yorkshire, an hour and a half to get to the council headquarters in Northallerton, as it happens, an hour and a half to go your 50 miles because of the way the road network is in the Yorkshire Dales. So how is that local? So I think local government is under threat, the real local in local government. And we as Liberal Democrats must start fighting back, which brings me to what you've described as hyperlocal, Zoe. So in these areas of North Yorkshire, quite often they too have parish councils as the deliverers of really local services that people really love and respect. But in many big urban unitary councils do not exist. So where I'm a councillor is Ford has 14,000 electors for 3 councillors. So nearly 5,000 electors for every councillor. And we have no parish council or town councils. I've tried to get one, maybe at local and IPPR North to help us to develop one, because that is no longer a local service when you have wards that are so big. And that is ditto for the new unitary. The size of their ward for their councillors is roughly 3,000 electors per councillor, and that becomes not local. So I think as Liberal Democrats, we really do need to think, get local decisions made really locally. And think, you know, we love Europe, so let's think about how Europe does their local government. Think of France, where every little village has its own mairie. You know, so they can do local. Why can't we? Why do we have to constantly put it under the cosh? We need to empower people, and local government and hyper-local government does that. And as Liberal Democrats, we've got a fight on our hands, so I hope you'll join me.
Thank you very much. I think that's really set out the stool for us, from linking the kind of the devolution at the sort of national to mayoral level down to the hyperlocal. So thank you very much. Tim, over to you.
Thank you, Zoe. Good morning, everybody. My name is Tim Pickstone. I'm Chief Executive of LDPC, the Association of Liberal Democrat Councillors. And when I'm not doing that, I'm also a local councillor. And I've actually had 2 different experiences of being a councillor, which has been quite an interesting process. 20 odd years being a councillor in Greater Manchester with a very similar experience of CAF, with no parish councils and large urban wards, and more recently being elected to the brand new Cumberland Unitary Council in what used to be Cumbria, and also serving on a parish council, in fact one of the last parish councils in England, called Nickel Forest on the Scottish border. So in 2018 I had the pleasure of chairing the policy working group that came up with the party's current policy on this issue, which was called, you can Google this and read it if you really want to, it's called Power to People and Communities, and that's the adopted policy of the party. And what that talks about is that the Dems believe in a devolution revolution, which is not just devolution down to, you know, to city regions and to local authorities, but it's crucially a devolution all the way down to local communities. So that's our policy. And some of the detail on that is that we believe in town and parish councils wherever the local community wants them, and making it easier for that to happen. We also very much support neighbourhood forums in their different ways, and also about trying to find ways of giving town and parish councils more capability of doing what they need to do. So that's the policy, and just sort of digging into that a little bit. I think some of us in principal local authorities are quite often experimented with what are called lots of different things, but are essentially local committees. Whereas most normally a group of wards are formed together into being a local committee, and some decisions have evolved down to that. And at best, and Eastleigh is always held up as a real exemplar in this. I don't know whether it's true or not, but it is held up as an exemplar. Lots of budgeted decision making is devolved to those committees. And at worst, these things are talking shops with no power whatsoever. So I think probably as Liberal Democrats, we probably believe that the former model is probably better. But I also would say that ultimately that these are a good thing because they're taking some decision making down to nearer to people, but it isn't actually the total answer to local democracy. It is just a way of bringing principal council decision making closer to people. So I think as Liberal Democrats, our solution to this is quite clearly probably an electoral solution, because we believe in democracy. You know, the clues in our name, Liberal Democrats. So we believe in it, that elections are the way for people to determine how their local area is governed. And I would say that we have the model in place already, which is town and parish councils, and we don't need to necessarily invent something new, because that exists. And you know, there are 10,000 town and parish councils in England, 750 community councils in Wales, and sadly not a similar thing in Scotland. And they are delivering great things for their local communities. You know, at best, they're making services better in their towns and villages. They're leading their towns and villages forward and making them better places, and delivering some services that the principal local authorities can no longer afford to do, which, you know, is all a good thing. But there are some really big things that are not wrong, are not right. So one is about 2/3 of the population of England is not served by a town and parish council. So the map looks like most of the country is, but in terms of population, our cities in particular are missing out on this level of democracy. The second big point we have is that there's extremely varied capability at the town and parish council level. So my parish council has 400 electors. It's obviously not going to have the same capability as Shrewsbury Town Council. But also, even within that, people have different levels of money, people have different capability of councillors and parish clerks. So there's a huge variance in what these people are able to do. And the third thing is a democratic deficit, because sadly, so many town and parish councillors are elected unopposed, which I think is a real issue for that whole democracy thing. Now, thankfully, as Liberal Democrats, we could actually do something about that third one quite easily, in that we can stand more times in more town and parish council elections, you know, and make them contested. And it's a great thing to do. It's a great thing for members to do. It's a great thing we can do to make our community better places. So let's do more of that. The second thing is we can be leaders in creating new councils. So Kath mentioned local government reorganisation before, and that has been a driver in many places to create new big town councils that used to have district councils. So Shrewsbury, I think, is a good example. So Salisbury, where new big, Northampton's a very good example, where new big town or city councils are created because the local government reorganisation has meant that happens. And we can be in the driving seat of that, and we can also be in the driving seat of trying to create them in urban areas. And I think also when we are Liberal Democrat town and parish councillors, we can be the ones that push forward good practice, good governance, good ideas in those town and parish councils. But ultimately, I suspect we do need some sort of structural change to allow town and parish councils to have the support to do what they need to do. Yeah. So as you know, as principal councils, we have lots of support and checks of the other local government, but we need parish councils to be enabled to take that power. So I think this is something that Lib Dems can lead on. I suspect our opponents are not really talking about this issue. So it's something that is unique to us. But you know, come on, let's make, when we talk about devolution, not just devolution from Whitehall to City Region, but really devolution right down to people's communities. Thank you.
Brilliant. Good. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Owen. I'm Chief Exec of the National Association of Local Councils, which represents 10,000 parish and town councils in England. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and talk to you about, to emphasise really the importance of double devolution and empowering local communities. I think we will all agree with that end place. We might have different views on how we get there, but I think the spirit and the objective is clear for us all. I've got two arguments really. One is that it's never been more vital to realise the potential of the hyperlocal in the United Kingdom to address some of society's biggest problems, from the climate emergency to the cost of living crisis, to restore trust in public institutions which have been eroded, and to build community resilience, to enable communities to effectively address whatever comes along. And we've seen COVID, we've seen flooding, we've seen lots of other things, and strong communities can respond to address those challenges much better than remote bodies. Secondly, and that picks up really what Tim said, don't ignore what you've got already. And that brings me on, I suppose, to just setting out a bit of a vision of what I think the local building blocks should be of hyperlocal governance and empowered communities. So I'd ask you to kind of almost close your eyes and imagine if there were 100,000 hyperlocal communities across the UK, all selecting, say, 10 residents to represent their interests and to plan for their communities. Wouldn't that be a good thing? They'd be given legal powers to deliver on the plan that their community wants, and they'd be able to raise a small share of tax and access other funds, loans, grants, and so forth through their formal structure. They'd have a paid community organiser to help them, and a safe place, or a community hub, or a village hall, or whatever you want to call it, where residents and groups can use, and a safe space in times of crisis. They'd be operating within a strict framework of rules, transparently, and they'd be sustainable for 100 years plus, not dependent on any few groups of individuals or community groups. That's the kind of vision I think I have for hyperlocal governance. Now, in England and Wales, we actually have that at the moment in the form of community town and parish councils. And actually, in Scotland, there's a call to set them up too. The recent report from the Scottish Local Government Committee has recommended setting up community councils in Scotland. So it's a movement that's gaining pace. As we've heard, there's 10,000 local parish councils in England at the moment, 100,000 unpaid councillors and professional officers, and they're all working to build stronger communities, democratic and accountable local leadership, place shaping hyperlocal public services, and strengthening the social fabric. And in fact, Onward, the think tank, has a social fabric index, which shows that areas with parish and town councils actually have a stronger social fabric and better community than even in areas without parish or town council. Now, not everyone appreciates the potential of these hyperlocal councils, and I think it's important to recognise that those councils are changing fast. We're now investing something like £2 or £3 billion in local communities. They're doing more because of devolution, and there is some devolution that is taking place, and they're tackling some of those big issues like the climate change. And more are being created. So over the last 10 years, about 300 have been created, including in the most deprived areas. So Lowestoft in Suffolk, where I live, has a new town council which is doing tremendous things to bring that community up. And Queen's Park in London, one of the first London councils. So I think their potential is vast, but I'd like to, I think, share with you some thoughts where they need to improve or develop. And firstly, I'd like them to be reimagined as community councils. Calling them parish councils is a complete switch off for people, and they should be rebranded community councils. Secondly, they should be rolled out across the country, making it easier to set them up. I think we need to remove the bureaucracy and some of the legal framework that stops them getting on with their job. and puts people off becoming involved. I think we should reduce the voting age to 16 and introduce modern forms of election and participation to encourage people to get involved, including e-voting. I think we need to invest in all this. We need to support more people to get involved. And I'd like to see a national democracy fund, better publicity, better awareness, allowances for carers, and significant investment by the government in building their capacity. Principal authorities, districts, counties and unitaries get 20-odd million quid from the government. Our sector gets nothing. And that means that we've got the capacity issues that Tim has flagged up. So I think the potential here is vast, real opportunity to drive that forward over the next few years and really embed hyper-local governance in the work of this country. And I think community councils, formerly known as parish and town councils, should be at the centre of that. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm all for a live rebrand. So there we go. We've never, anyone who's been in this room will never mention town or parish councils are going to be community councils. We've had a lot, I'm conscious of very pro town and parish councils, and I'm not putting you on the anti, George, just to be clear, but I'm kind of interested now to hear from you as someone who's involved in more than the neighbourhood level.
Yeah, so I'm George. I'm a full-time university student. I'm studying urban design and planning, going into my master's now. For the past 4 years, I've been involved in neighbourhood planning. We set up a neighbourhood forum back in 2019. We've been quite lucky to have what's known as a big local area, which is administered by local trust. So we've been benefiting from £1 million of investment that's been delegated down to us as residents to decide how we want to improve our area over 10 to 15 year period. We've got 2 years left now of our programme till we spend out. And our area is quite challenging. We are in a town called Chatham, which is in Kent near London, and it's very deprived. It's in the top 10% most deprived neighbourhoods across the country. We've got a very sort of transient population as well. We've had residents who live there for 3-4 months and then their landlord kicks them out. So it's difficult to get people involved in sort of hyperlocal processes when they just don't exist in that area for more than 4 months perhaps at a time. We've been able, as I say, to have that big local area, to have that sort of support mechanism throughout those 4 years, which has provided us paid staff to oversee a neighbourhood forum, but also been able to tap into sort of local resources, locations to do whether it's, community consultation events, but also just knowing the people. For the big local, we've been able to meet some people, but we've also been able to meet a different set of people as well for neighbourhood planning work that we've been doing. And I think the biggest challenge that we've been facing with neighbourhood planning, I mean, we've been going for 4 years, and I think that's enough to just say that is it really working for a group of us with at least I think minimum 21 people have to join a forum for us to be designated as one. 4 years to put together for a neighbourhood plan, set out the future of a small area, a small corner of our town. Is that really feasible? It's a really technical process. We have to go through regulation 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, all these different hurdles along the way just to get that plan in place. And it mimics what local authorities have to go through for their own local plan. So to expect residents to follow that same process is quite a challenge, quite a big ask. And neighbourhood planning, in a way, when they first introduced that more than a decade ago now, it kind of shifted that burden from local authorities down to communities to set out their own vision for their own areas. But we're still very reliant on local authorities to give us that technical support where we need it, whether it's policy wording, whether it's for providing evidence towards those policies. So in a way, we're still very reliant on local authorities, and at the same time, they've got budget cuts. They're facing a lot of shortages with their own planning sort of teams. So it's a struggle for both us and also for the local authorities involved. We've got a unitary authority, so they're responsible for planning and all sorts of matters like housing and highways, but they're under a lot of strain. So it's interesting to hear sort of how parish councils and town councils, how they operate, and in a way they've got that. Sometimes they're quite lucky, and especially in rural areas, that they've already got those mobilised communities. In an area like ours, where, as I say, we've got residents living there for maybe 3 months, 4 months tops, it's difficult for us to come together and create something like a neighbourhood plan when it's so transient. And I think, yeah, the index that you mentioned from Onward, we also looked at that for our area. We're at the bottom of the scale. We don't have much social infrastructure. Even meeting points like pubs, we've only got one left in our community. Despite it being an urban area, we are lacking a lot of social gathering points for the community. So without that foundation, without those building blocks for mobilised communities, it's difficult to expect the community to come together and create something like a neighbourhood plan. So that's my sort of take on things.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's a brilliant range of perspectives. Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing that. If I may just start with a few questions, and then before we come to you, so please do start thinking of the questions you'd like to ask the panellists. Baroness Pinnock, if I may come to you first. I was quite taken by, Tim, what you said about current Lib Dem party policy, saying areas should have town and parish councils wherever they want them. Do you think there is demand for more town and parish councils?
Yes and no would be my answer. Yes, because people feel that the decision makers are moving away from them, and despite sort of access via e-access to local services, it's not the same for, doesn't build the community, does it? So yes on that hand, and then people go, we'll have to pay a bit more, and do we have to have more elections and more council? Yeah, if we're going to make decisions about our area, yes, we will need to pay more a little bit. We will need to have elections because that's the fairest way of having a group of people to make decisions on behalf of us all. But so it's yes and no, I think, is the mood out there. My own council, Kirklees, has been in the news lately for all the wrong reasons, because it's basically gone bankrupt, and therefore closing a lot of social facilities. So in an area of 180,000 people, which is half the district, there will not be a leisure centre, for instance, which is huge, isn't it? Huge, and it's in a deprived area. So we've somehow got to empower people to see that if they take control of their destiny, they will get the better answers for their community than the ones they've got now.
Okay, great. And Jonathan, if I may come to you, just looking into that, I suppose one sort of critique that's waged against sort of the town and parish council model is how representative they are of society, and that they tend to be people who are very engaged and very active, and that's very welcome, but perhaps on average a little older, whiter, and more male than the average member of public. What do you say to that? What do you think should be done to try and improve the representation of these types of councils?
Well, I think that is a challenge for local councils. They do need to become more representative of the communities they represent. The average age of a councillor is actually 61, and the split between male and female isn't too bad, actually. I think it's about 55, 45. But other groups are certainly not represented. So we do need to do more on that. We'd like to see some national promotion of the opportunities to get involved in local councils. And coming to the point about the creation of local councils, actually there is quite a lot of support for creating new councils, including Whitstable in Kent. But the coalition government actually had a fund to enable communities to start the laborious piece of work of collecting signatures, renting rooms in pubs or whatever. That fund sadly dropped away, but there was quite a good sort of flow of new councils coming through that process. So I think something like that, pump priming, would really help get more people involved and engaged with their communities.
Yeah. Interesting, really good. And Tim, if I may come to you, kind of linked to that, I suppose another element of discussion in this debate is, where we have kind of unitary local authorities, should they in fact just be doing better at bringing in participatory approaches with the community so that they can kind of take part in local authority decisions as opposed to bringing in another tier of local government? What do you say to that balance, I suppose, participation perhaps versus representation, or maybe they're two sides of the same coin?
You're right. I think it's probably both. I mean, I think what sort of slightly depresses me sometimes about this country is that democratic engagement is at such a low level, and in many areas people only stand up and want to say something or do something when something's wrong. You know, when something big is happening that's wrong, and people get agitated or excited, and then shut the door and get on with the rest of their lives when that isn't happening. So I think that there's a bigger problem in this country that I think as Liberal Democrats we should be doing our best to tackle. But you're right, principal authorities, there are lots of different tools that done well can really properly engage a local community in decision making, but they are not cheap. You know, they're not things that just happen because you say they'll happen. You have to. I mean, I'm fascinated with the amount of investment, George, in your project is quite significant, and you've done very well through that. But at this time, the government, as Kath said, is super short of money, and some places are having to focus on, you know, keeping children safe and keeping people alive, aren't we? And essentially, government will need to properly fund local government if we're going to do this properly.
Yeah. And last but not least, George, if I may come to you, it's really fascinating to hear your experience of the system, so to speak. In terms of the neighbourhood forum you're involved with, obviously it's kind of targeted at the kind of planning system, and there's a bit of a question that's raised as to, actually, if you've got a bunch of engaged people who are already engaged on something as gnarly as planning, why not broaden the number of issues that you're involved with and actually use that and grow that as a forum? Do you know, through the practice and through your experience, do you think it should or could take on more areas of local policy?
Yeah, so I know even for neighbourhood plan in the early days, we were looking at things like highways. How do we influence the look and feel of public spaces? But then we were told that's not, you know, land use planning. So sometimes there are things like that where we would have wanted to have a say, but we were denied that because that's just how the system's set up. And of course, we have to focus on land use planning, as you say. I'd say yes, there is potential to look further afield, especially when we've already got a forum, you know, put together. That's, you know, very lucky to have that established and in place. Although I suppose there's a question around, does that add more to workload to us? Does that add more barriers for engagement? But also in terms of that interaction between us and local authorities, how does that work in practice? It's definitely something I think there's scope for that, and it'll be interesting to see whether, you know, neighbourhood planning could be streamlined as well, which could get more people involved going forward. I know there's a lot of talk around introducing things like neighbourhood priority statements, and whether that's something where, for example, we could influence things like the highways or infrastructure on a broader scale. There are some neighbourhood forums which take on things like Section 106, where they're able to have a say on that and community infrastructure advice. But our area doesn't have SIL, and Section 106 is, you know, it's difficult to get those conversations sometimes when there's a checklist of things that local authorities are already prioritising to spend money on. So it's difficult, but I think if there is a mobilised community, then there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, brilliant. And what's your future in? I mean, obviously you're studying urban planning, so, you know, are you kind of going to be involved in big locals for life, or are you going to aspire to be a town or parish councillor?
I don't know yet, but we'll have to see.
Watch the space.
I know, haven't figured it out just yet, but I think, yeah, it's something, you know, planning is something I'm very interested in. With Neighbourhood Forum, although we will have the plan in place hopefully by next summer, let's say, if it gets through at the referendum, we are hoping at that point it's just a case of having to monitor and actually implement our plan. It's all well and good having a plan, but we need to make sure that the council uses it and that developers follow it. So there's a role there as well.
Super, brilliant. Well, thank you for all of that. I'm now going to open up to questions. maybe loads of questions. Fantastic. Lib Dems engage in local governance. It warms my heart, honestly. I will take 3 at a time, given the number of hands we've got in the room. Should we start at the back and take the triangle of hands, the 2 ladies and the gentleman at the rear, and we'll take 3 at a time, and then we'll work out later who to come back to. If you could say your name and if you're here as a party member or with an organisation, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, of course. Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Allen. I'm the Director of Policy at Shore Trust, but also a Lib Dem member. So I know you asked about representation on councils, but I think I'd go further. I don't think the issue is advertising. I think the issue is on an uneven distribution of power and social capital in communities. So my question really, my challenge to you is to share thoughts on how we can do better. How can we build devolution in a way that challenges those things so that we don't accept pre-existing power structures that we see everywhere, and we don't replicate those, because I don't think advertising is enough, and I don't think it's good enough, actually.
Thank you.
Yeah, kind of following up from that, I'm Daniel Mermelstein. I'm from North London and born in North London. I'm a Lib Dem member. So I hear Jonathan talk about how we need tens of thousands of councillors. I hear Tim saying that they're not there because most councillors are being elected unopposed. You talk about how the average age of a councillor is 61, and I campaign for something called universal basic income, which is just giving people money effectively. I do it for many reasons, but one of the reasons I do it is because I think that active citizenship actually requires time, and the thing that buys you time is money. And so we just need to give people money so that they can stop worrying about where they're going to get food for tomorrow and being more active citizens. And I guess I want to hear what your views on that.
I think there was a third question, maybe. Sorry. We'll answer these around and then I'll come back.
Hello. Hi, I'm Sarah. So I'm from North London as well, like Daniel, and I run Kentish Town Community Centre. So the 2 things I would say, I'm also a member, is I think it's very difficult for us in London to understand what's happening outside London because we have a different system. I think it's really important that we talk about that because we have one parish council, is that right, in Notting Hill, but we don't have that. So, and because a lot of power is in Westminster, I think it's difficult for people to understand this dual system. So there's something to talk about that on. The other thing to mention is resources. So in Camden, which is in North London, we have loads of community centres, one of which I run. And so they can become the community hubs. They can be the places where people get resources, where people engage. We do a lot of engagement at our centre, whereas where Daniel is behind me in Barnet, I think they've got like 2. Is that right? It's like so even in London, the spread of resource in terms of community engagement is really scattered. But I think it would be a good step forward to start engaging in those community centres / community hubs. It's a very mixed picture though, and I think it would be interesting if someone from the panel could also talk about that. So the 2-tier London, non-London system and the use of community hubs would be great. Thanks.
Brilliant, a fantastic and very engaged set of questions. So firstly, how do we build new power systems so that local town and parish councils don't just replicate existing systems? Secondly, a nice challenge, the link between UBI and active citizenship, and actually whether that would facilitate a better range of people to be represented. And then thirdly, how does it look like out of London, and what role for community hubs? Baroness, may I come to you and then I will open up, and please just take whichever questions you feel inclined towards, unless I need to put you on the spot on something, in which case I'll come back.
These are really challenging questions. They're great questions. Yeah, I'm going to start with the third because, look, I live in Yorkshire, right? So London's a long way from Yorkshire. And people get really fed up in Yorkshire about people in London making decisions about Yorkshire because they're not the same. And all of you come from different parts of the country, may feel the same. And even in London, they feel the same, as we've heard, that we are too centralised as a country. We are the most centralised governed country in Europe. Everywhere else spreads the power out to local communities, but not ours. Ours is drawing it back in. And we need to find ways of empowering our citizens, our communities, to make the decisions that affect them. And now, so I accept what you said. I just wish I had a single community centre in my ward of 15,000 people. Not one, zero, zilch. This is the problem, part of the problem. We all think everywhere is a bit like us, don't we? Now then, let's not replicate existing power structures. Now that is a real challenge for me as a Democrat, because I fundamentally believe that if anybody is making decisions about the rest of their community, they ought to be elected. Because otherwise, why should they be making those decisions? Who's given them the right to make those decisions? But the trouble with that is the challenge I've had, which is there is a tendency then to replicate power structures. So that's made me think. So thank you for that. I'm sure there's a way out. Perhaps Tim or at the end we'll be able to answer it. And I'm going to skip the UBI question for those who know more about it. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course, of course. Tim.
So I think the thing about democratic capacity in the community is quite interesting, and I actually think hyperlocal government can help there. So, for example, in places where there is no very local government, as Kath says, our community centres are closing, places have no infrastructure, largely because the principal local authorities actually can't afford to do any of that they used to do 20 years ago. Whereas in somewhere with a town or parish council, they can afford to give £300 to the WI, or keep the community centre open, or open and mugger, or you know, so that infrastructure exists. So in actual fact, in urban areas that don't have this level of government, we are missing out because our community centres are closing, our playing fields are being neglected. So we need to somehow fill that gap. So on the London issue, and it's not just London issue, it's a city issue, isn't it? So it might equally apply to say Manchester, which is a massive city which doesn't have a single bit of local government below the city council. And I don't necessarily know the answer, because I think you probably can't. Government might say differently. It's probably difficult to replicate the exact sort of village structure that exists at the moment in other areas. And it may be we have to find a different model. I mean, I was trying to think, maybe we need to look abroad, for example. So, I mean, if you think in Paris, they have elections, as I understand, arrondissements, so have elected officials that they go in bits of Paris, essentially. And it may be there are other models that we can look at about how bits of cities have democracy, and see if somebody else has already discovered the answer that we can copy.
Yeah, well, I think we ought to be thinking about where things will be in, say, 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And that's where I think active citizenship and UBI might well come in. Things are going to be very different, aren't they? And I think that having some sort of structure at a very local level with a democratic accountability is something that we should be building in now, like we used to build sewers and motorways and railways, you know, to enable when the society changes that they can match on to that active citizenship and have a really meaningful role in shaping their communities. And on London, well, there's probably some I don't know, some London borough councillors in the room. You could start off by not stopping local communities set up parish and town council, which is happening all across London. Tower Hamlets keen to set up a parish council, they get overlooked or thrown aside by the upper tier council. So you know, we need to address that point as well.
I think one of you did mention, if I may, just on the UBI point, which everyone's skirted around a little bit. I mean, I'm not for live writing the manifesto, if you'd like, you know, but it, like, there is a point here. So I think one of you mentioned about paid for community leaders. I can just speak to perhaps the point that was made around actually, you know, in order to change power systems, we need to think who has access to these opportunities, who can give their time, on what basis. So there is something there, isn't there, about, you know, those two things being linked.
Very much.
Whether or not you link it fully to UBI or not. Did you just very quickly?
I think there's a reason why most of the people who participate are over 60, right? Because they all have what is effectively UBI for all people, which is called the state pension. So there is,
lucky to get that 61.
It's not brand.
Yeah.
So why are we not empowering everyone else in a similar way?
Yeah.
Well,
I think that's a really good point, and I may actually come over to George on that point, because obviously you're not an elected official, you don't have a salary from this. Yes, you are an urban planning student, but you know your time is still very precious. How do you think, with your experience of the Neighbourhood Forum, how can you find the time, or your colleagues in the forum, and you know what are the trade-offs and considerations, and what do you think we can learn from that about better involvement in these structures at a hyperlocal level?
Yeah, I think, as I said earlier on, we would quite like to have a bigger local area within our that covers the same Neighbourhood Forum patch. That we were able to access that paid staff to get the neighbourhood plan to where it is today. But as you say, it's been difficult to get people involved, even getting people along to committee meetings sometimes. Yeah, they've got their own time commitments, they've got their own life to lead, and that's quite difficult to have. Try and get the two aligned. People's personal lives, especially in an area like ours where they're facing quite big challenges, personal challenges, whilst getting them involved simultaneously in a very technical, arduous process. I think it goes back in a way to that challenge around how do we try and get people involved, and what do those systems look like? Because not every area is the same. We might share similarities in terms of not having a community centre and deprivation, but sometimes no two streets are the same. I think that's quite important as a country. We recognise we need a little bit more flexibility perhaps around how we approach power structures, and trying to listen to the communities of what's the best approach for them. Because as we see, even to join, to set up a neighbourhood forum, all the councils have the same template form that you have to fill out. I mean, with our council, we had one, they had a form for town and parish councils, but they didn't have one for a neighbourhood forum like ours in an urban area. They had to put one together at the time. So there is that challenge around, we are kind of quite obsessed sometimes with the same sort of spreadsheet that we have to fill out, but does that work for everyone?
Yeah, great, thank you. We've got just over 10 minutes left. I'm going to take perhaps actually 5 questions at once, just to try and get, and then it's a bit pick and mix because we won't have time to answer all 5 by all 4. But I would like to hear what you've got to say. So if we could start with this gentleman, 1, 2, 3, and then I will move down the side to the
Councillor Mike True. I've been a Yate Town Councillor now for 40 years, also been a principal authority councillor for 40 years and currently chairman of South Gloucester Council. But my heart is in Yate Town Council, which has been Liberal run for those 40 years. We have find that people are willing to pay more council tax to provide local services which they can see being operated in their area. Putting up the general council tax for the whole of the district doesn't have that same thing. We spend something like £40 of our council tax on youth services. I think South Gloucestershire gave effectively running up those. But the one drawback in terms of that is those most deprived areas have the least tax base. So those that need the more money have these resources to do it. I think we need to find a way of addressing that cross subsidisation.
Thank you. Really important question.
Yeah, I'm Bob Blezard. I'm based on the Isle of Wight. Just a plug for unitary authorities, actually. We were the first in the country back in 1995, but with a population of 140,000. So on the Isle of Wight, it made sense. And that, in a sense, was actually a driver to get the whole of the island emparished. So that's certainly one of the, I think, big drawbacks is, yes, elections are important, but if you're a small parish council as we are, a by-election, for example, will cost possibly over 10% of our precept. And we, in the past 18 months, we've had 2. It seems to me that the cost of elections should fall on the authority that arranges the elections, either the unitary authority or the district council. So that's something that would be a great benefit. And I'm looking at George and thinking that maybe a a local council for your area would be a good thing. I'm not using the P word, but I'm surprised actually that Chatham doesn't have a town council.
Hello, good morning. My name is Mark Laurie. I'm from a national charity called Street Games. We work in the most deprived areas around the country with community organisations that support young people. Listening to Jonathan talking about the next 10 years, I'm really struck by the issues that young people are facing now, particularly in areas like the one George lives in at the moment. And I'm just wondering about how we inject both pace and some more radical thinking in terms of engaging young people. Because if we don't do that now, I've got two daughters who wouldn't get involved in democracy right now, probably, sadly, but there's a lot more we could do.
Brilliant, thank you. Could we ask the lady here? Oh, will you? Lady there and then the lady there, thank you.
Hi, my name's Sally Markwell. I'm the Deputy Mayor of Seaford Town Council. We only have 23,000 population. The most frustrating thing for us is that whatever decisions we tend to make, planning and highways, community services, whatever in our committees, ends up getting deferred back to Lewis District Council, back up to County Council. And if you want local participation and engagement, they don't need to come to full council to find that all the issues that they are concerned about have been bounced back, so that they actually don't have a local voice. They can tell us what they think, and we can take that onto our committees, but we are completely strung up by the fact that we don't have local ownership of those budgets, and we can't actually make those decisions. And planning law is just an anathema, because we cannot make local town council plannings. If we say no to the local town plans, it goes back to the district. They say yes, it comes back and they say you have not supported us. We say yes we did, but there's nothing we can do about it. So if you want citizen engagement, you have to show already that they are going to be engaged with some level of power and empowerment. Because at the moment we are feeling, all of us, very disempowered. So you don't think you're going to get hyper-local unless those structures have changed.
Really interesting point. Thank you, Sally. And if I just may just come here, and then I will come back to the panel, because I think otherwise we'll run out of time. Sorry to miss.
Sarah Hands, I'm the Deputy Leader of Tewkesbury Borough Council. I'm absolutely all for, you know, local, I'm dreading when they try and make us a unitary if it happens. My experience though with parish councils is that something needs to be done over the governance of, you know, who can join, or, you know, that sort of thing. My personal experience in my ward is 4 parish councils. All 3 of 4 have a Conservative chair who I kicked out in May, and the 4th one has a space and he's planning on going on it because he lives within the distances you can. He's not on it for the people, he's on it for the politics. He's on it to shore up his position for next time. And that's my experience with a lot of them in our area, and I'm sure across the country. I mean, the word toxic is used quite a lot, and it shouldn't be. The closer you are to the residents, the less political in a way it should be. So my question, I suppose, is how can we change the governance to be able to monitor these sort of things? Really, you know,
thank you for your brilliant question, and I'm sorry to miss the 3 there, but perhaps either immediately afterwards, or if you want to email them to me, I'll email them to the panel. Sorry, there's homework for you too. You didn't sign up for that, did you? May I come to each of you? I will just quickly repeat the questions. If I may come to each of you, respond to the questions you want to, and with a final thought as well, because we're going to have to do, it's never been done at a conference fringe event, but we're going to have to do questions and wrap up all in one. So we had a great range of questions there. We talked about council tax actually being regressive in terms of deprived areas not being able to get as much as others, the cost of elections, engaging young people, decisions being deferred up the chain in local authorities, and political toxicity. So that's a whole lot of things to start with. May I, I'll come to you because I think you were coming in there, Jonathan, George, and then I'll come to you for close. Thank you.
Well, first just to answer Bob's point on, when I was refreshing myself with Liberal Democrat policy in this area, one of the policies is that town and parish councils shouldn't face the burden of holding election, because it's actually a disincentive to holding a contested election. We didn't actually answer the question about who should pay, who should provide the money, but we probably should do that, shouldn't we? But and my final thought, actually, I guess, is in Tewkesbury is ultimately the answer is in 2027 there are elections to these 4 parish councils. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, but fine, boy, you know, there are colleagues in Barnsley, for example,
STV,
who are, you know, the principal council got so fed up with the parish councillors that they actually just decided this year that they were going to take it over, and they have done, and it's now an entirely lived out council. And problem solved.
Okay, take it over. That's your final thought, Jonathan.
I might just pick up the young people point and kind of mix that a bit with what some other people have said. I think we need to move away from hyperlocal democracy being about committees and stuff. I think it's about actually making things happen on the ground. And I've got 2 children, and I say I work for parish councils, and you can see them fall asleep, you know. But when they're looking at their local town, which has been taken over by Green and Lib Dems, and they're seeing the nature pathways being formed and youth provision and all this sort of stuff, they get quite excited. So I think making local councils, community councils, actually active councils rather than sort of debating chambers. I think that would help dramatically. And my final point would be, we've got a leaflet here that sets out why parish councils are so brilliant. So please take one of those and be really interesting.
Brilliant, thank you. George?
I think, yeah, going back to your point around sort of youth engagement, it is difficult to do that, and especially with the structure that we've currently got in place. And I think we're getting that sense of a greater distancing between the decisions that are being made, who are they being made by, and the people that they serve, and who are they going to benefit. Even with levelling up, shared prosperity fund, all those funding streams, we're seeing challenges there and problems around, are they really benefiting the communities that they should benefit? And even with things like the chewing gum fund that the government's brought into place, should we really have local authorities competing over chewing gum funds? I don't really think that's effective. So I think that's what we need to do, is look at how we can be more flexible and try and learn from the communities what suits them, what fits their sort of model.
Brilliant, thank you. And last but not least, Baroness.
Thank you very much. I'm going to pick up the 2 issues. What about people? So that is absolutely vital for the health of our democracy. Every school should have a school council. And if they don't, in your patch, encourage them, because that helps them understand how decisions are made for a community, a school community. I know that's just a little drop in the ocean, but it may be a starting point. And every council should then have a youth council fed in from their school councils, so they can then replicate some of the decisions made for them by the elected council. So that's what I would hope we do. And finally, what we really need is devolution, proper powers to local parish councils, community councils. I will now call them forever, as they are in Wales, community councils, to make the decision on behalf of the people who have elected them.
Brilliant. Well, on that note, a massive round of applause to your brilliant questions, and to our partner local trust, who have also left some propaganda on your seats to take away, to learn about a manifesto for community and neighbourhood governance reform. So enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks very much for attending.
It's been really good.
Yeah, that was